This conference will now be recorded.
So yesterday we were discussing about what is Docker Swarm and how to set up Docker Swarm. Are you guys able to set up a Docker Swarm cluster? Anyone tried or yet to try? Okay, good. Arvind has done the setup. Okay. What about others? Okay, what about the assignment, guys? What about the assignment? I have given one assignment. Is anyone able to do that assignment successfully? Okay. Okay, make some time out of your schedule and try to do that, guys. Otherwise, it will be difficult. Now, don't initialize the Docker Swarm on a public IP address. If you initialize Docker Swarm on public IP, if you stop the server and if you start the server, public IP will change, your cluster will break. If you want to initialize on a public IP, you have to use elastic IP, static IP. Even though you start the server, your master server, and you start your server, your IP will not change. So don't do that with public IP. If you want to do it with public IP, use elastic IP. As I already told, you no need to do with public IP because does all your Kubernetes, Docker machines, is it running in same VPC, same network? Will they able to communicate with each other with private IP without internet also? So don't do it on a public IP. Okay. Let's continue. Now, yesterday I have created a Docker Swarm cluster. Yesterday we created a Docker Swarm cluster with one master machine and two worker machines. If I want to add a secondary master, what is the process? If I want to add a secondary master, another master, what is the process? What needs to be done? So get the token, master token, get the master token and execute that master token. And also, if it is a Docker Swarm cluster or any cluster, will I able to Docker Swarm cluster, will I able to achieve high availability in master with two master nodes? No, you can't achieve high availability with the two master nodes. Okay, only two. So if you see, there is a concept called a Docker Swarm quorum. Docker Swarm quorum. So in the Docker Swarm quorum, we need to make sure we need to have the servers in this way. If you observe, if I have only one master, do we have any fault tolerance? Which means if that master goes down, do we have any other master? If it is only one master? No. If you see, if I have a two masters also, do we have any fault tolerance? Which means if one master goes down, the other master will become a master if I have just two masters? If you observe here, there is a quorum. Do you have any fault tolerance here? If I have two masters, we don't have a fault tolerance, right? So we should maintain odd number of managers in the swarm. We need to maintain odd number of managers in the swarm to support manager node failures, which means any Docker Swarm cluster you take, you will have a masters in the odd numbers. What is the meaning of odd numbers? You will have like 1, 3, 5, like this, 7, like this. If you see, even though you have a 2 masters, if one master goes down, does other master become a leader? If you want to practically do it also, you can do that. If you want to practically prove that also, you can prove that. You create a one more master machine. I mean to say you create a one more Docker server, execute the manager token in that machine and stop this machine or stop the Docker process in this machine, the primary machine, the primary leader. You stop this Docker service in this primary leader after adding another manager. Go and check the other manager. Will it become a leader? Will it become a leader? No. So if I want to have a high availability in the masters, we need to have a quorum. So in the quorum, we will have odd number of managers. So if I have a 3 masters, what is the fault tolerance? I mean to say, how many masters can go down still you have a master? How many masters can go down still you have a master? Only 1. So even though I have a 4 masters, maximum how many masters can go down? Only 1. So you need to have a managers in which number? In an odd number. So that's why if you go to any Docker Swarm cluster, you see 3 masters are like this, 5 masters. You don't see 2, 4, 6 like that. Okay. So I was using Docker Swarm almost 3 years back. We were working on one project where we were using Docker Swarm. We had 3 clusters. 3 clusters. What is the meaning of cluster? We had 3 clusters. So for dev environment, 1 cluster. For QA environment, 1 cluster. For prod, 1 cluster. So in prod cluster, we were having 3 masters and 10 workers in the prod Docker Swarm cluster. In dev, we were having again 3 masters only, but less number of workers. We were having just 5 workers. In QA is a replica of prod, so we were having same. So cluster is different, container is different, server is different. Don't get confused. So 3 years back, we were working one project where we were using Docker Swarm. Each environment, 1 cluster. Again, each cluster contains again set of servers, group of servers that can be masters and workers. So we used to have this much servers in the prod and QA. So sometimes in the interview, they will ask how many clusters you are using. If you are using Docker Swarm or if you are using Kubernetes, how many clusters we will use, right? Ideally, per environment, 1 cluster. Per environment, 1 cluster. Let's say you have dev, QA, prod. How many clusters? Whether it's a Docker Swarm cluster or whether it's a Kubernetes cluster. Per environment, 1 cluster. Suppose if you have 4 environments like dev, QA, pre-prod and prod. In that case, ideally per environment 1 cluster. So if you have a 4 environments, 4 clusters, right? So we were not having UAT environment. We were directly doing a UAT, user acceptance, user acceptance testing in QA itself. That depends on company to company. We were not having UAT in that project. So again, what is the system capacity of your servers? Sometimes in the interview they may ask, what is the capacity of your server? Guys, if you have a multiple applications, multiple containers, you will not create another cluster for that client, for that project. I can have the more resources, more servers. Suppose instead of 5 workers, I may have a 10 workers if I have to deploy a lot of application for that project, for that client. One cluster, more resources. Now, sometimes in the interview, they may ask, what is your system capacity? So in my project, this is 3 years back, we were using Docker Swarm. My system capacity was something like this. 32 core CPU, 256 GB of RAM. Each system, each server this much capacity. So total how many servers we had in a production Docker Swarm cluster? Total 13 servers. Out of 13, 3 managers, 10 workers. So each server capacity is this much. Each server capacity is this much, which means 13 into what is total cluster capacity? Total cluster capacity 13 into 256 GB. Total cluster. Total CPU 13 into 32. Cluster capacity. Server capacity, cluster capacity. So you may have a question, sir, why these many servers and again why this much configuration? That depends on what? Sometimes in the interview they may ask why you are using that much CPU, that much memory. That depends on what again? That depends on what again? That depends on the number of applications, the number of containers you are trying to deploy. The number of applications, the number of containers you are trying to create. You should be able to justify, guys. Don't blindly say I am using 256 GB RAM. In the interview, if they ask why you are using 256 GB, what should be your answer? The answer is because I have some project. That project has a lot of microservices, and each microservice needs to be deployed as a more containers. To deploy those many containers, we are having this much capacity. Depends on the number of projects, number of containers you are trying to deploy. Don't get confused with again containers and clusters. Don't get confused with containers and clusters. Sometimes in the interview they may ask this question also. How many containers you have in your project, in the production? Maybe in the production, or normally they will ask how many containers you have in your project, your application, or in your cluster. Don't get confused with containers and clusters. I'll tell you one issue what happened when I was explaining Docker Swarm for one of our previous batch students. I told we were having 600 plus containers, 600 plus containers in production, Docker Swarm production cluster. I told I have 600 plus containers in the production cluster. In the interview, one of our student only, she attended interview, she cleared all the technical rounds. She cleared first round, second round. Package discussion also has happened. Last, manager had just a formal call. Manager scheduled one interview just for a formal discussion, like just to know about her experience and other expectations. In that discussion, manager asked one question: how many clusters you have? You said you have a experience in Docker Swarm. You said you are working on Docker Swarm in the current project. So can you tell me how many clusters you have, Docker Swarm clusters? She got confused with containers and clusters. So she told, I have 600 plus clusters in my project. She got confused with containers and clusters. So she told 600 plus clusters I have. So that was the last question to her. The manager told, okay, I am done with my discussion. HR will come back to you. So silly answer. She didn't get the job. At least I mean to say she didn't clear that interview because of that silly answer. So even though you are explaining I have 13 servers, they may ask question why you have a 13 servers, and they may ask what is the system capacity. You may say this much. They may ask why this much. You should be able to justify, guys. You should be able to explain why I am having this much CPU, this much memory in my workers in my cluster. That is because of this much. That is because of this. Will I able to deploy these many containers if I go with less resources? If I have a less resources in the cluster, less CPU, less memory, will I able to deploy these many containers? No. So you should be able to justify. Season is asking, sir, cluster number is equal to total number of Git branches? No. Git branch is different. Git is basically your source code repository where you are maintaining the code. Clusters are basically per environment. You have an environment. Let's say, forget about Docker or Kubernetes. You are using normal Tomcat. So if you are using normal Tomcat, you have a dev environment, you have a QA environment, production environment. Do you have a separate Tomcat servers, separate database servers for each environment? Yes. Similarly, if you are using Docker, you will have a separate clusters for each environment. Can I deploy whatever applications I want to deploy in this cluster? I may have a 600, I mean to say, let's say I have a 20 microservices, 30 microservices. Can I have each microservice as a separate Git repo? And each microservice will be a separate Docker image. Can I deploy that Docker image in my Docker Swarm cluster as a container? Yes. So Git branch is different, environments are different. Now, sometimes in the interview, they may ask how many microservices you have. In this project where I was working 3 years back, in that project, we were having approximately 30 plus microservices, approximately, let me remember, approximately, I think 35 microservices. 35 microservices, which means each microservice is a separate code base. Each microservice is a separate code base, separate Git repo. Each microservice will generate separate Docker image. Again, you may have a question. Sir, you are saying 45 microservices, how come 600 plus containers? As I already told, are you going to have a single replica, single container? You may have a multiple replicas, multiple containers. Based on the load on that application, based on the load on that microservice, you will have a multiple replicas. Okay. So these kind of questions also you will get in real time in the interview, real time questions, right? How many clusters you have, what is the cluster capacity, what is the server capacity, how many containers you are running, like this. Hope everyone is clear, guys. What is cluster, what is server, what is containers? And again, can I go with even number of masters like 2, 4, 6 in Docker Swarm? Do you see any time like these kind of things? Even though I have 4, will I able to achieve same thing with the 3 masters itself? Even though I have a 4 master, do we have any use of that masters? Can I achieve whatever I can achieve with 4? Can I achieve with the 3 masters itself as per the Docker Swarm quorum? If you see, so you will have this type of quorum. So for example, in Swarm, you have a 5 nodes. If you lost 3 nodes, you don't have a quorum, which means maximum how many masters can go down so that still you have a master. If you have a 5 nodes, 5 masters, 2. So we created a Docker Swarm cluster. This is my master. As of now, how many masters, how many workers I have in this cluster? 1 master and 2 workers. So does process is going to be changed? I said I am using 3 masters, 10 workers. If you want to really set up 3 masters and 10 workers, will I able to set up based on whatever I have explained already? Do you guys will be able to set up if you really want to set up 3 masters and 10 workers with whatever process I have already explained? Will you able to set up these kind of clusters? You can create another other servers. For masters, get the manager token and execute. For workers, get the worker token and execute. Now our cluster is ready. Let's come to the deployment. How to deploy the applications in this cluster now? It's a cluster. As I already told, whom should we contact to deploy the applications in this cluster? Do I need to talk to the workers individually? No, only master with master machine. Now, how to deploy that application? Can I use this command, or can I use this command to deploy in a cluster the way we deployed so far? The way we deployed so far, the way we created a container so far. Can I do this way? This is not the way we are going to deploy. This is not the way we are going to deploy in the Docker Swarm cluster. So this is a normal standalone mode. So if I execute that command in the master, where container will be created? Does container will be created in a swarm mode or normal mode? Now if I do this way, the container will be created in a normal standalone mode, which means where this container will be created? Does this container will be created in same machine where I am executing this command, master? Yes. If something goes wrong with this container, do you get another container? If I do this way, see, if something goes wrong with this container, do you get another container? If I do this way, no. So this is not the way we are going to deploy in the cluster. So we need to create a service. Docker Swarm service. So we have to create a service. Docker service create. Service name. You can give some name and image, from which image you want to create. So Docker Swarm, in Docker Swarm, we are going to create a service. That service will create a containers and it will manage the containers. We need to create a service. In Docker Swarm, there are two types of services available, guys. Service, there are two types of services. Service, Docker Swarm service is basically it's a group of one or more containers of same type in the sense same image. Service is a group of one or more containers of same type, same image or application, right? So we have to create a service, and there is a two types of services in Docker Swarm. We have a service types or service modes. Service types or service modes. One is replica mode, another one is global mode. We have two types of services. One is replica mode, another one is global mode. Replica. What is the meaning of replica in general? Replica, replication, replication or replicas, copy. So number of instances like here. So here it's a number of containers. I can create a service in a replica mode by specifying how many containers I need, how many replicas I need for that image, for that service. Replica mode. So when I create a service, I can create a service in a replica mode by specifying how many copies of that containers is required for my application. Replica mode. What is the default mode? If I don't mention also while creating a service, if I don't mention the mode, service mode, in which mode service will be created? The service will be created in a, this is the default one, replica, with how many replicas? With one replica, one container. So replica mode. We have a service. Service is a group of one or more containers of same image, same application. So if service has more than one replica, one container within the cluster, the service act as a load balancer. So one service, I mean to say one service can communicate with other service, using service name. One service can communicate with other service using service name, right? DNS. If service has more than one replica, one container, Docker Swarm service does the load balancing between those replicas, those containers, which means I can create a service with 2-3 replicas. Some other application, some other microservice is trying to access this microservice using service name within the cluster. If that service has more than one replica, it does the load balancing, container load balancing within the Docker swarm, within the cluster also. It does the load balancing, container load balancing. That is service discovery and load balancing. Now, service has two types, replica and global. Replica in the sense we can create a service in a replica mode by specifying how many replicas you need for that service, for that image. When it comes to global mode, each and every node in the cluster will have a copy of the container, will have a container for that service. Each and every node will have a one container for that service, each and every node. So we can't scale up, we can't scale down global service, which means will I able to increase and decrease the containers if I create a service in a global mode? If I create a service in a global mode, will I able to increase and decrease the number of replicas, number of containers for that service, that application? No. We can't increase, we can't decrease if the service is created in a global mode. If I create a service in a replica mode, will I able to increase and decrease the number of replicas, number of containers for that image? Yes. So what type of applications we will create in a replica mode? What type of applications we will create in a global mode? Sometimes in the interview, you may get these type of questions. What type of applications you will create in a replica mode? What type of applications you will deploy in a global mode? So, like agent softwares, like internal softwares, like you want to monitor that server, like monitoring agent, or you want to do the log aggregation, log agents, kind of a monitoring, logging agents, monitoring agents, alert agents. So you can have those kind of a agent softwares. You can have those kind of a agent softwares in each and every node. You need some software. Can I run that software as a container in a global mode so that if I add any node, that agent software will be automatically created? So agent softwares we can run in a global mode. Our own microservices, our own applications, our own microservices, whatever we are developing, that microservices, our own applications, in which mode I can deploy, so that based on the load on that application, I can increase, I can decrease the containers. Our own microservices can be deployed in a replica mode, so that we can increase and decrease. Now, when it comes to the servers, worker machines, I am using AWS. Can I create my servers in different availability zones within that region? That AWS concept. I no need to repeat that again. So I have a Docker server. These servers, can I create these servers in a different regions, different availability zones? This server may be in 1A, this server may be in 1B. within this region, I can have these servers in a different availability zones. That is AWS concept. But all are in the same VPC. All are in the same VPC, same network within that region. Will they able to communicate with each other since they are in the same VPC within that region, but it can be in a different availability zone? That remains same. AWS concept remains same. So we have these types of services. Let's try to demonstrate. Now, do I have any services created as of now in this cluster? Docker service ls. Do we have any services created in this cluster as of now? Whether it's a global service or replica service, do we have any service as of now? No. How many nodes we have? How many nodes we have in this cluster? 3 nodes. Now, let me try to create a service. Docker service create hyphen name service name. Let's say this application. Let's say this application. Now, from this image, port mapping. If you want to access this from outside the cluster, do I need to do the port mapping? Outside the cluster, I want to access. But within the cluster, the other application, can they use this name, whatever name I am giving, service name? Within the cluster, if one application, one service wants to communicate with this service, can they use this service name for communication? Yes, right? But outside the cluster, I am doing this port mapping, port forwarding. Now, I have not mentioned the mode, in which mode service has to be created. What is the default mode? Replica. How many replicas will be created for this service? I mean to say, for this image, how many containers will be created? Replicas are nothing but containers. Only one. So where that container will be created? We are requesting via master. Who is responsible for assigning or scheduling the containers in this cluster? The master. Where it will be created? That can come in any node. That can be created in this node, or that can be created in this node, or in this node, based on the resources available. The replica can come in any node. So by default, master machine is also active. Master machine is also available, which means, does containers can come in the master also? Because by default, master machine is also active to take the containers. So which means, does containers can come in the master also? If you see, it is active. The container can come in the master also. Now, I created a service. So how many services we have now? In this cluster? One service. That is in which mode? The service is created in which mode? The mode you can see, the replica mode. So what is this? What is the meaning of this one by one? What is upper one? What is the lower one? What is this 1 by 1? That is desired current. Desired current. So since I have not mentioned how many replicas I need, by default, what is the desired number? 1. So desired is 1. Do I have one replica as of now? One replica as of now? Yes. But where this is running? Where this is running? Where this is running? In which node this is running? Right? I can check like this. Docker service ps, this service name. Docker service ps, that service name. So in which node that replica is running as of now? We have only one replica for this service, only one process, one replica for that service. In which node that is running as of now? 103, which means master. Here. Now there is a inbuilt service discovery. Now even though the replica, the container is not running in this node or this node, if I access this application via this node, will I able to reach that application? Since all are part of the same cluster, my application, my container is not running in this node, but from this node, will I able to access that application? From this node or this node, will I able to access that application? Even though it is not running in that server, but part of the same cluster. Now here in this node, let me open the port, that inbound port, host port. Now we have a service, but the container is not running in this machine, but it is running in the cluster. This machine is also part of the cluster. Now if you see, am I able to access that application using that machine IP and that port? If you see, am I able to access that application which is running in this cluster? But is this container, does the container for that service, is it running in this node from where I am trying to reach, from where I am trying to access? Do we have a container running in this node? No. But since it's part of the same cluster, the containers or the services are running as a in the cluster. Since this is also part of the same cluster, am I able to access? Am I able to reach that application? Whether it is running in that server or whether it is not running in that server, that doesn't matter. We will be able to reach. There will be a service discovery. Right? It can identify where exactly it is running. It is going to route the traffic to that server and that container. Now, I have only one replica. That is running in this server in the current machine. If I stop this server, I mean to say, if I remove this container, I'm intentionally removing in this server, 103 server, this container is running. I'm intentionally removing, but in real time, container can go down for any reason. Am I going to get container automatically? No, since this container is managed by the service Docker Swarm. So I'm intentionally removing. So current becomes what? Desired is 1. Current become what if I intentionally delete? Current become what? 0. So desired is 1. So does it again do the desired state reconciliation? Does Docker Swarm will make sure you have a enough desired number of replicas for that service? So I have only one container. I'm removing that container intentionally. Again, if you see, as of now, desired is 1, current is 0. But after some time, can I see again? 1 by 1. Does Docker Swarm is orchestrating the containers? Does Docker Swarm, is it orchestrating, is it managing the containers now in this cluster? Now if you see, is my application down? Is my application down? No. So if I am using only Docker, something went wrong with your container. Are you going to get another container? Your container is down, your container is stopped, container process is crashed. Are you going to get another container in a normal Docker? No. Now, if you see here, failed, this container is failed some time ago. I have intentionally removed this container. Do you see this container is getting recreated again, replaced again? Maybe same server 103. So it has recreated. Now I have only one container. If there is a lot of load on this application, this container, does request will go to only this container, right? Will it able to, do we get a better performance? Do we get a better performance, high availability if I have only one container, one replica? Let's say I'm intentionally removing this container also again. I'm intentionally removing this container which is running in this machine. This container I'm intentionally removing, but before removing, so I have not yet removed. The application is available. I have intentionally removed. Since I have only one replica, do I have a high availability? Do you see, is my application is down for some time? Since I have only one replica, is my application is down for some time? Am I able to access that application for 10-15 seconds? Again, my application is back, but was it down for 10-15 seconds? So if I have only one replica, will I able to achieve high availability, load balancing? No. So that's why we will have a multiple replicas. Now, will I able to scale this service? Since this is created in a replica mode, will I able to scale this service? I can do this way. Docker service scale, Docker service scale, this service name equals to 3, 2, 4, 5, something like this. Now if I say 3, currently what is desired now? Desired is what? 1. Now I am trying to scale, saying 3. So desired will become what? Now the moment I execute this command, this desired becomes what? 3. So will I have 3 replicas? Does Docker will make sure we will have a 3 replicas now for that service? Does Docker Swarm will make sure it will have 3 replicas for that service? So it is creating a other replicas in the cluster. Now, if you see, now what does it mean? What is the meaning of 3 by 3 now? Expected 3 replicas, actual 3 replicas. Now, can you see the first replica, the service name .1, the first replica is running in this node. The second replica, do you see second replica is running in some other node? the third replica is running in some other node. So this replica is running in this node, right? So we have a 3 replicas. Now, when we are accessing via service, since we have a 3 replicas, does that service does the load balancing round robin? If there are multiple requests to that service, does that service forward the request round robin fashion? Container load balancing. There is a load balancing between those containers, right? So if I have a more replicas, if there is a lot of requests for that application, that service, does Docker Swarm does the load balancing between those replicas? Does request will go to the same pod, same container, or it will distribute round robin? It will distribute the load. That way, do we get a performance? Since the load is getting distributed, do we have a performance in that application, that service? So it does the load balancing. Now I have more replicas. Now let's say I have 3 replicas or 2 replicas, let's say. Now I'm intentionally removing one of the container of that service. I'm intentionally removing one of the container of that service. Even though I removed, do you still see application is available? Now request is going to other containers, other replicas which is running? Is my application is down? I have more replicas? No. But in the background, again, does Docker again recreated that container again? Does Docker again replicated that container again in the background? Do I still have 3 service? I mean to say 3 replicas again. So we have a high availability, load balancing, and all those stuff. Will I able to achieve these things if I go with only Docker, normal Docker? No. So the way you have a containerization, there is a container orchestration softwares to manage the containers, to scale the containers, to load balance the containers. You have a container orchestration software like Docker Swarm. Now, based on the load, we can we can increase and decrease the containers. Now, if required, can I scale it to 4? Can I scale it to 5 if required? Now, how many replicas I have for this service? Now, how many replicas I have for that service? 5. I have only 3 nodes. I have only 3 nodes in this cluster. Where the other 2 replicas are running? I have only 3 nodes in this cluster. I have only 3 nodes in this cluster. So, where the other 2 replicas are running? If you see, does this node 103, does this 103 has 2 replicas? This one and this one, the master machine. Does it have a 2 replicas? And also this 159. Does it have a 2 replicas? It has a 2 more replicas, right? We can scale up, scale down based on the load. Now, if I scale down, which replicas will be removed? So I have, as of now, this one, this one, this one, this one. I'm trying to scale down again to 3. Out of these 5 replicas, 5 containers, which one will be removed now? The ones which are recently created. So which one? the recently created these two. We can scale up, scale down. Does Docker Swarm support auto scaling? What is the meaning of auto scaling? Auto scaling of the containers. Does Docker Swarm supports auto scaling of the containers? No. Docker Swarm supports only manual scaling. So now I am doing some scaling. Is it auto scaling or manual scaling? Whatever I am doing now. This one. Is it a manual scaling or auto scaling? It's a manual scaling of the containers. Docker Swarm doesn't support auto scaling of the containers. What is the meaning of auto scaling? Based on the load. Based on the load on the container, it has to increase and decrease the containers automatically. Based on the load on the container, it has to increase the replicas, it has to decrease the replicas. Based on the load on the container, it has to increase, it has to decrease. Does Docker Swarm support? No. So that is only manual scaling. But if I go for a Kubernetes, then it supports the auto scaling of pods there. Okay, it supports manual scaling as well as auto scaling. But when it comes to Docker Swarm, only manual scaling. We can scale up, scale down. Now, for end users, we have a load balancing internally within the cluster. But does end users access this way using IPs and ports? Do we need some external load balancer also outside of this cluster? Do we need some ELB or Nginx which will sit in front of the cluster? The end user request goes to that load balancer. That load balancer forward the traffic to your Docker nodes on this nodes IPs and ports. We have a load balancing internally, and we need to have a load balancer externally. That external load balancers using Nginx or using HA proxy or using ELB, you can set up the load balancer. So that external load balancer is for whom? Does end users will directly reach your Kubernetes nodes like this node IPs, node ports, this server IP and that host port, that host IP and host port? No. So in front of this Docker Swarm cluster, can I have some load balancer, external load balancer, and can I create a target groups or reverse proxy rules in that load balancer? So a request goes to load balancer, that external load balancer, then that external load balancer forward the request to your Kubernetes nodes using that host IP and host port. Arvind was asking this question. So you got clear, Arvind? I think you are asking the same question. So you will have an external load balancer, you will have an internal load balancer. That internal load balancer is within the Docker, within the cluster. But will I able to access using that service name outside? Suppose I have a service name. Can I use this service name, kind of a DNS name, from outside of this cluster? No. But other application, other service, will it able to access this service using this service name within the cluster? Yes. Internal load balancing, internal. Let's say, let me create one more service. Service to service communication within the cluster. Let's say this one. Let me maybe deploy this application, maybe Node.js application or Python application. So let's say, let me deploy this Node.js application maybe, or Python application, whatever it is. Let me deploy this. I'm creating a service for this Docker service create hyphen name node app, something like this. If required, I can do the port mapping if I want to access outside. Within the cluster, if one service has to access another service, do I need to do this port mapping, port forwarding? Not required. And also, while creating a service itself, I need to have mention replicas. Can I mention something like this? Hyphen replicas 2, which means this service is created in which mode and how many replicas will be created because of this option. While creating a service itself, I am mentioning 2 replicas. Now, how many services I can create, how many replicas I can create, again, that is based on what? That is based on the resources available in the cluster. Will I able to create hundreds of services, hundreds of containers in this cluster? Whatever cluster I have? No, because what is my cluster capacity? I have only 3 servers, each server 1 GB RAM. So what is my total cluster capacity? Cluster capacity is 3 GB RAM and 3 core CPU. Each server 1 GB, 1 core. So what is my total cluster capacity? 3 GB, 3 core CPU. So will I able to deploy hundreds of containers, tens of services in this cluster? No. So that is based on your resources. That is based on the resources available in the cluster. The how many services, how many containers you can deploy in this cluster, that is based on the resources available in the cluster. Cluster is nothing but group of servers. Now, how many services I have? Now, how many services I have in this cluster now? 2 services. And how many containers I have in this cluster? How many containers I have? 4. Right? Now, let's say this service want to communicate with this service. Will they able to communicate with each other using service name? Maybe let's see. Let me go inside this container which is running in this one. So let me go inside this container. Then let me use this. So since it is running in a default overlay, it is not able to resolve. While creating a container, while creating a service, did I mention the network name under which network this service has to be created? While creating a service, did I mention under which network this service has to be created? No. So by default, there is one overlay network. I have not created this overlay network. So who created this overlay network and when this overlay network got created? Now these services are created in this overlay network, the default overlay. The overlay network name is Ingress. Using overlay driver. When this is created? This is created when we have initialized the Docker swarm. That time this network got created. Now the services are created in that network. I can inspect the service also. Docker service inspect that service name. So if you see, you can see all those details like network related, how many replicas are there, when the service is created, all those things, right? So you can see the service details, all those stuff. The way we have inspected containers, we have inspect the services also. If you see in which network that is created, if you see now the containers of those services are created in which network? The default network ingress. Now since it is default default overlay network, that host name resolution is not working. So if I have these networks, if I have these services created in a custom overlay, will they able to communicate using that service names instead of IPs? So it can communicate, right? So using service names, it can communicate with each other if I have a overlay network. Now how to create a overlay network this time? Will I able to create a overlay network like this? -d overlay, something like this. Now let me delete these services. And I will recreate the services in this network, right? So let me do that. Guys, if I delete the containers, does containers will be keep on creating if I directly delete the containers? Yes. If I want to permanently delete this application, what needs to be deleted? I want to delete this application permanently from this cluster. So what needs to be deleted so that application will not run in this cluster? I need to delete the service. Docker service delete this service name and also this service name. RM, Docker service RM, not delete, Docker service RM. Now Docker service RM. Now do I have any services in this cluster since I have deleted service? No. Now let me create a services in that network now. I'll say what option I can use to mention hyphen network, that network name Java app overlay. So we already have a overlay network. Now it is created. Similarly, let me create other application also. That other application also in the overlay network. This application, same overlay. Even though containers are running in a different nodes now, since they are part of same overlay network, will they able to communicate even though the containers are running different servers in this cluster? Since they are in a same overlay network, they can talk to each other. Now we created a containers services basically in that overlay network. Now if I have any container which is running, let me inspect. Now this time, do you see, is it running in this overlay network, Java app overlay network. Now let me go inside one of the container. Maybe let me go inside this one only. Docker exec -it, this container. I'm not sure which one I have, bin/bash. Yeah. Now, if I ping other one, the other container, other service, this one, ping is not there. Let's see if I have a curl. Curl is there. Now, curl on that port, am I able to talk to that application? Let me use -l here. Now, if you see, is one application, one service, is it able to communicate with other application, other service? Let's say this service has, lot of, I mean to say multiple replicas, multiple containers. Does the Docker Swarm does the load balancing between those replicas of that service? If I have more containers, more replicas, service to service communication, service to service communication, right? So if there are multiple services, multiple containers, I'll get the response from that one. If you see here, it is saying connected to 10.1.7. 10.1.7. What is the 10.1.7? Let's see that. So this one, Docker inspect, this one, 10.1.7. If you see, that is basically kind of a service IP. Let me check the container IP. Container IP might be different. Okay. So even though you have more containers, let's say I have more replicas. Docker service scale, this service name equals to maybe 3. Now, if I have more replicas, when one more application is communicating with this application using the service name, does the load balancing? That is basically, this is kind of a service IP. There will be a DNS, internal DNS, right? Kind of a service IP. So if I have more replicas, does the load balancing? That service name is resolved to this IP. That service name is resolved to this IP. This is kind of a IP of that service, virtual IP, that will route the traffic to the actual pod, actual container. Okay. So this way, does one service can communicate with other service using service name? If there are more services, will it act as a load balancer within the cluster? Yes. Now, the way we have a replica services, we can create a global service also. The way we have created a replica service, we can create a global service. I'm taking some simple image. If it is a global service, will I able to scale up, scale down? Hyphen name. I'm just giving something like this. This one, hyphen mode global. I'm using this image just to demonstrate. So now this will be created in a global mode. How many containers will be available for this service? Now, how many containers will be created? based on the number of nodes I have. How many nodes I have? How many nodes I have total? How many nodes I have total in this cluster? As of now, 3 nodes. Now, in each and every node, one container will be created for global service. In each and every node, one container will be created for global service. So that how many containers will be there for this service now, global service? 3. If you want to update some details of service, you can use service update. If you want to update the image of a service, or if you want to update, right, replicas also, you can use service update also. Now, if you see, this is in a global mode. Why it is showing 3 by 3? That is because we have total 3 nodes. Now, suppose something went wrong with this node. Suppose something went wrong with this node. What will happen to the containers which is running in this node? Suppose something went wrong with this 103, not 103, that is master. Let's say 59. So you can execute something like this. What containers are running in this node also you can see. Docker node ps, that node name. So these are running in that node. If something goes wrong with this node, what will happen to the containers which is running in this node, which is scheduled by the swarm? These containers are scheduled by the swarm. So what will happen to those containers which is scheduled by that master which is running in this node? Suppose something went wrong with this node, what will happen to the containers? It will move to the other node. Let's say I have a global service, I have a replica service. If something went wrong with this node, how many replicas will be having for this global service? Does the global service containers also will be created in another node, or only replica service containers will be created in another node? Only replica related. Now let me do that. Intentionally I am making something, I am intentionally making this this server down. I no need to stop the server. I can just stop the Docker service. Let me connect to this server. Let me connect to this service server. So here some containers are running. If something goes wrong with these containers, this container, whatever is created by Docker Swarm, this container will be recreated. There is no issue with server. If something goes wrong with container, does the container will be recreated, maybe in same node or different node? If you see, if something goes wrong, container will be recreated. But I'm intentionally trying to stop this node itself. So instead of stopping the node, we have some containers running in that node, which is scheduled by Docker Swarm. Now I'm intentionally stopping, instead of stopping that server, I am stopping the service, Docker service. Now it is up and running. Now let me stop the Docker process. I am stopping instead of stopping the server. So Docker itself is down in this server. Now, does your master machine will be able to reach that machine? Will it able to communicate and identify? I have intentionally stopped. It is stopping. I'm stopping and again it is coming up because there is a Docker socket which is keeping that again up and running. Maybe let's stop the server itself. Let's stop the server itself. The process is again getting started. Let's stop the server itself. Now that server is down. So that Docker is down in that server. Now, what will happen to that node, or what will happen to the pods which is running in that node? I stop that one. Here, the node is down. The node is down. It is not able to reach. Now, what will happen to the pods which were running in that node? What will happen to the pods which were running in that node? It will move to the other node. It will move to the other node. If you see, still have a 2 by 2, still have a 2 by 2. But when it comes to global, the expected become 2. The expected itself become 2. It is not going to move that into other because this node is down. This node is down now. This node is down. Now, if you see, the containers are moved to the other node for this service, whatever which is running. Now, if you observe, because of very less resources in this cluster, my servers become very slow. If you observe, I have only 2 nodes. Now, this many containers are running in these 2 nodes. If you observe, already do you see, is my server responding very slow? My applications may also impacted. The cluster may also get impacted. If you don't have enough resources, will it impact your cluster also? If some server goes down or some worker goes down, will it impact your cluster if you don't have enough resources in the cluster? It is going to impact if you don't have enough resources. If you see, is it responding, guys? Now, is my server is responding because lot of containers are running now. So it may stop responding. It's become very slow. It became very slow, right? So let me start this again. Let me start this again. Now, if you observe, is your manager is trying to manage the containers. If the node goes down, is it trying to move the containers to other nodes? Yes, right? But is it going to recreate a machine? Is it going to create the servers machines? No, right? So it will just manage the containers. Now, let me remove. While practicing, don't deploy lot of services, guys. Don't deploy lot of services while practicing because you have very less resources. Your servers also may not work. So don't deploy lot of services when you are practicing. If you are using T2.micro, practice with less containers, less services. This become very slow. I need to increase the capacity or I need to delete the services. So let's this is not at all responding. Let me do one thing. Let me do one thing. I'll stop the server. I will increase the capacity because it is not at all responding, because there are a lot of containers which is running in those machines now. Let me stop this server. Now one more question, guys. Sometimes in the interview they are asking this question. If something goes wrong with master went down, master is down, what will happen to the containers which is already running in the machine, in the workers? Does your applications also will go down? Whatever which is already running in the workers, will those containers will be also deleted or down? If something goes wrong with your master, whatever containers which is running in other workers, what will happen to that containers? Suppose you don't have a multiple master, only one master is there. If you don't have a multiple master, let's say only one master is there, in that case what will happen? Is it continue to run the existing applications? Is it continue to run? It will continue to run existing containers, but if something goes wrong with that container, do you get another container? Which means, does container will be recreated? The existing containers will continue to run, but if the container goes down for some reason, does the container will be recreated, since you don't have a master who is looking after? No. Applications will continue to run. If there is some issue, it won't be recreated. It won't be recreated. Okay. Sometimes these kind of questions also you'll get in the master. So the application will continue to run in that worker, but if something goes wrong with that container, you will not get another container. Okay. Now let me change this instance capacity. Let me change this instance type from t2.micro to t2. T2 small, t3 dot medium 3. So it is not showing t2 dot medium small. Okay, here it is there, t2 dot medium. So let me start this again. So why we face this issue? Why we face this issue? Any idea like why we face this issue? Why my server was not responding, that master machine? Because we were having lot of containers in this one. We were having lot of containers in this cluster. One of the node went down. One of the server went down. What happened? What happened that time? We intentionally made one of the server down. What happened that time? The containers which were running in that node shifted to these nodes. Since these nodes doesn't have enough CPU, enough memory, does it impacted the cluster? So which means Will I able to run lot of applications, lot of containers if I don't have enough resources in the cluster? If I don't have enough resources in the cluster, we cannot run lot of applications, lot of servers, okay? A lot of containers. So let me connect to this now. Now, this time I have good amount of capacity. I have good amount of capacity. Now this time, if you see, it is working as expected. Now let me start the other server also. This server also. This one. It is already started. Let me check why it is showing down. Maybe the Docker process is down. The Docker process is down. This 96 is shown as down. That is because of the lot of load. The Docker process is not responding in this one. 96. This 96 is down. It is showing as down. This 96. This one. This one is shown as down. Why it is shown as down? Because there might be a lot of load on this server now because it doesn't have enough CPU, enough memory. The Docker process may be stopped responding. So if you go and if you are able to SSH to this server, and if you are able to start the Docker process, then it will work. It will come up. If I am not able to SSH at all, what is the only option I have now? How can I make this node again up? If I stop and start the service, I mean to say, if I reboot this machine, will it work? I'm not able to SSH to this machine to see. Yeah, now it is able to. Sudo service Docker status. Now it is up. Hopefully this time I can see that node also in ready state. Yeah. So again, this is up. So all the nodes are up. I can see my services are functioning correctly. Since again this node is up, can I again see the global service 3 by 3? I can see 3 by 3, which means I have 3 nodes ready. I have a global service also 3 by 3. If I add any new node, if I add one more node to this cluster, does the container will be created for this global service automatically without making any changes? If I create one more node and if I add that node to this cluster, does the container of this global service will be created in that new node? It will be created. Okay. So global service, can I scale the global service? Can I scale the global service? Docker service scale. This is the service name. Am I able to decrease? Am I able to increase? No. Now, let's say I have my worker nodes are down. My master machine, I am trying to create a service. Does the containers will be created in only in the master now? If all my workers are down, if I create a services, does containers will be created in the master itself? If it is active, if it is active, The containers will be created only in the master. But again, if there are less CPU, less memory, does again master will be impacted? Just now it got impacted because of that only, right? Few minutes back, master was not responding because of that only. The containers shifted to master. Master doesn't have enough CPU, enough memory to accommodate those many containers. So master was stopped responding. So that's why I stopped the server and I increased the capacity. So we have a few more concepts. I'll continue tomorrow. I thought of covering today, but it is not possible. We have a few more concepts. We have a concept called a Docker stack. We have a concept called constraints, labels and constraints. So I'll continue that tomorrow. Okay. Docker Swarm, I'll continue tomorrow also. First time for this batch. Yeah. Docker is going for 16 days. I usually used to finish Docker in 12 days or 14 days. But for this batch, 2 days more it took. We are trying to discuss maybe a lot of other things. So Docker itself is going to 16 days now. So tomorrow I'll finish the Docker Swarm. We'll discuss all these things, labels, constraints, Docker stack. There is a drain, all those stuff will continue tomorrow. So I'm giving a running notes. I'm giving a running notes. There I am explaining the Docker service commands, scale commands, create commands, all those stuff. I'm going to give a running notes. The way I'm giving running notes, I'll give the running notes. But don't blindly follow the running notes. Understand the concept. That is recommended. At least I recommend that way. Don't blindly execute, okay. So execute this command. Definitely that command will work because I have executed and gave you. So try to understand the concept and apply the concepts. That way you can learn the concepts. Okay. Definitely I will give the running notes. I have given the cheat sheet also, the Docker cheat sheet. In that cheat sheet, you can see these type of commands. Okay, guys, that's it for today. Right? We'll continue tomorrow. What is the Docker dashboard GUI? That is basically we told in Enterprise Edition we have a one additional tools you are going to get. In that Docker Enterprise Edition, you are going to get some additional tools, UCP. What is that UCP? Universal Control Plane. Control pane. This is GUI. GUI for Docker. GUI for Docker and Docker Swarm. Which means the way you have a AWS GUI, the AWS console, you can have a GUI for Docker also, but that is enterprise software. Universal Control Plane that you will get with Enterprise Edition, where you can see the nodes, containers, volumes, networks, everything from the UI itself. But for automation do we do using UI, GUI? Whether you want to create an image or create a containers or services, volumes or networks, we will never depend on the UI, GUI. Always we will use either APIs or CLIs. So what are we using now to create images, services, volumes, networks? We are using CLI. We can have a dashboards that is also enterprise software. Thank you guys. I'll continue tomorrow, but I don't see much response from the assignments. I cannot force. It's up to you. I am here to help you. If you are doing the assignments, if you are stuck, I can help you. But if you are not at all ready to do the assignments, I can't do anything. Okay. I cannot force. It's not a school or college. to point out each and every one. If you do the assignments, you will understand the subject. Otherwise, you can't. You no need to have a pro version of Nexus, Chandan. You can have a normal Nexus also. Tomorrow, I am going to show you how to push images to the ECR. Tomorrow, I am going to show how to push images to the ECR, how to push and pull the images from ECR so that you can use ECR instead of Nexus. Normal Nexus also you can use. It no need to be a pro. Tomorrow, I will explain with ECR also how to push and pull the images from ECR. ECR is a private repository in AWS, managed repository. Thank you guys. I'll continue tomorrow.